In the previous video, we created the requisition process. It has a small flow. You can submit and review new candidates only sequentially, meaning that you start considering a candidate only when the previous one is rejected. In this video, we will improve the process and make it possible to review several candidates at the same time. It can be done with a script. A script is code in TypeScript language that applies complex logic to your process. To add a script to a process, drag the script element to the process diagram. To start, I will first add a table to the process context. It will store a list of all the candidates considered for a requisition. In table settings, I will add columns for displaying information about a candidate. CV, assessment test, status. Each new candidate submitted by the HR specialist has to be added to this table. To do that, we will use a script. Let's add a new function and bind it to the script element. Then, I will go to the editor and write the script. Enter new candidate data to the table. Get app item. Create new row. Enter values into the cells of each row. Clear the candidate variable. Now let's go back to the process diagram and add connectors. After a new candidate is added to the table, the HR specialist should receive a task to submit candidates. Here, he or she can add a new candidate, send all the candidates with a new status for consideration, stop search, or send all the approved candidates to the hiring manager for the final approval. We previously set up the process in such a way that it is put on hold when the child process starts and until it is completed. Now, we will change this logic. When the review of a new candidate starts, we don't want the process to be suspended. Instead, we want it to go to the step that stands right after process start. To do that, I will select asynchronous start in the settings. However, in this case, you cannot pass the parameters from the child process to the parent one, meaning that the gateway that we added in the previous video now has no point at all. So we can delete it, and we can also delete the results variable from the context. Now let's add a task for the final approval of a candidate. We will configure its settings a bit later. Candidate review will run only for the new candidates. So let's add a script right before the child process. This script will collect a list of candidates with the new status. Let's add a variable for storing new candidates. I will select the app type and specify the candidate's app. Here, I will select the many option. Let's return to the element settings. I will create a new function, go to the editor, and write the script. Create an array of candidates with a new status. The script checks if there are any candidates that have the new status and saves them to the candidates for consideration variable. From the array, the candidates are sent to the child process one by one. If the array is empty, we want the process to go straight to the candidate selection task. For that, I will add an exclusive gateway. Let's go to its settings. To check the conditions, I will use a variable of the yes/no switch type. Its value will be calculated with a script. Let's give the script a name and go to the editor. I will write the following script. If the array is empty, write the last item to the candidate tab and delete it from the array. Write true to the service variable. Else, clear the candidate's variable and write false to the service variable. In other words, if there are any items in the array, the value of the service variable changes to true. If the array is empty, it changes to false. Each time the array is reduced by one item, until all of them are sent to the hiring manager for consideration. Let's configure the condition of the connector leading to the final approval. The process should take this path only if the value of the gateway service variable is true, that is, yes. The other connector will be the default one. If the condition of the first connector is not met, the process flow will take the second connector. Each time the candidate review process runs, the script in the gateway must be executed to add a new value to the candidate variable. So that the same candidate doesn't get sent for the review several times, we have to change their status before the child process. Let's add the Manage Status element to the diagram. Let's save the changes and add one more status to the candidate tab, under Consideration. Now let's go back to the process and configure the Manage Status element that we added earlier. Now we have to configure how candidates are sent for consideration. The logic that we want to implement is as follows. When the number of candidates that have successfully passed the first stages of the review process exceeds 4, they are sent to the hiring manager for consideration, that is, for the final approval. The hiring manager selects one of the candidates for the job. To check the number of the candidates to be sent, we will use an exclusive gateway. I will add it to the diagram and add the outgoing connectors. In the connector settings, we will use the yes/no switch. The value of this variable is calculated with a script. I will give it a name and go to the editor. Here, I will write the following script. Count the number of candidates that passed all the interviews. Set the initial counter value to 0. When finding a candidate with the second interview completed status, add 1 to the counter. If the counter is higher than 4, write true to the service variable. Else, write false. Let's return to the process diagram. I will add a condition to the connector going to the final approval task. The process will take this path only when there are more than 4 candidates in the list, that is, when the value of the system variable is true. If this condition is not met, the process will return to the candidate selection task. So let's select this connector as the default one. Additionally, I will add a notification to let the HR specialist know that the candidates were sent for the final approval. I will select the system as the author of the notification. Now let's set up the candidate selection task. Here, I will add a form template. To the form, I will add the table with a list of candidates. I will mark it as read only. When there are more than 4 candidates in the list, we have to tell the HR specialist to send them for final approval. I will add an information box widget to the task form. Here, I will choose the color of the box and enter the text that it will display. If we keep the settings as they are, the information box will always be shown on the form regardless of how many candidates there are in the table. We, however, need to hide it until there are enough candidates to be sent for approval. For that, I will use the Hide option in the System Settings tab. I will bind this field with a yes/no switch variable. I will set the switch to yes. This means that by default, the information box will be hidden. Let's define how this variable is calculated. I will go to the Scripts tab. There can be client-side and server-side scripts. Client-side scripts run in the user's browser, while the server-side scripts run on the Elma 365 server. You can learn more about that in the article about scripts included in this course. It is important to update the table each time the form is loaded, so that any recent changes are included, for example, a new candidate status or a completed assessment test. In order to make such an update possible, we will write a server-side script. Update data in the table and count how many candidates have passed the second interview. If there are more than 4 candidates, change the variable value to false. Then we will write the client-side code that will call the server script when the task form is opened. Let's return to the form template where we were configuring the information box. I will now bind the Hide option with the Hide message variable. I will then save the changes and open the process diagram. Let's go to the Final Approval task and set up a name template. I will then configure a similar form template as for the candidate selection task. Right now, there is the standard item form widget on the form. I will remove it and place the table with a list of candidates instead. I will make it read only. Also, I will add the candidate property to the form and make it a required field. With these settings, the table will show all the candidates considered for the current requisition. In the Candidates field, you will see all the candidates throughout all the requisitions. However, we need the table to show only the candidates that have passed all the interviews, and the Candidates field only the candidates of the current requisition who have the second interview completed status. To filter the table and the field accordingly, we will write another script. This will be the server-side script. Filter the table by second interview completed status. Filter the candidate field by status and requisition. Now, we will write the client-side script that will call the server script when the task form is opened. I will save the form template and publish the process. Let's see how it works. When the requisition is approved and the job is posted, the HR specialist is assigned a task to submit a new candidate. Here, he or she can add several candidates and send them all for further review. The candidates are interviewed and assessed in the child process. As soon as there are more than 4 candidates that have passed all the interviews, the information box will appear on the task form. The HR specialist will then send all these candidates to the hiring manager for the final approval. The hiring manager receives a table with all the candidates. He or she can open their pages, read the feedbacks given after the interviews, review the assessment test, and finally select the candidate that fits the job best. The HR specialist then informs the candidate and starts onboarding. The requisition status changes to filled, and the process ends.